Hello everyone, my name is John Michael Bushman and welcome to the new year, new card game. Yes, I am now playing the game that you see in front of you here, CardFight Vanguard. Decently aged card game. It's 10 years old at this point, but has gone through like 3 or 4 resets from what I hear. But from all of the players that I've heard who have stuck with it in spite of everything that has happened to it, well, it's like an abusive relationship. You can't help but get back into it because, good God, this game, when I finally understood how it actually ran, I understood. I understood why people kept coming back to this game in spite of everything that surrounds it. And this was the deck that finally got me in. And it's apparently one of the older archetypes in this game, Prison. And it's led by, well, as you can see, this is the alt art of this card in particular. And she is one of the main pro tags in the series that this deck hails from. And apparently the deck that she uses in the anime is actually also surprisingly competitively viable to this day, by the way. The build that you see in front of you is a refinement of all of the games that I have played with this deck over time. Now, if you're watching this on my channel and you know nothing of Vanguard, I am so very sorry. But if you do indeed know Vanguard, you have come to the right place. We're going to have a deck profile on my specific build of Prison, and or as most people have come to call it, horny jail, because it's an all-women police force. And yeah, we're going to actually start from the bottom and work our way up, starting with probably the centerpiece of this entire deck, Galaxy Central Prison Galactolus. This is an order, and it's basically like a field spell, and then you can only have like one, I believe only one of it at a time, or you can stack multiples. I'm not quite too sure on the rules. I literally just started a couple of weeks ago, basically just before the Christmas break. And the entire deck revolves around getting stuff into this prison, although only temporarily. Because your opponent can pay to get their units out, especially the rear guards, by either soul blasting one or counter blasting one. If they soul blast one, they get one back. If they counter blast one, they get two back. But you do have one specific effect in this deck that I will get to later on that basically, punishes them somewhat to when they do that action. And also, this playing the prison does have a cost, two of them in fact. If you play it, you rest one of your units. That's what this little symbol is for, and that's actually what turned me off with Vanguard in the first place. Is they do have all of these symbols, and I wasn't exactly quite sure what they meant. However, once I did indeed get the flow of things, and once the flow started feeling more natural, and once I started getting into the right swing of things, this game is actually surprisingly easy to get the hang of. Although, I will say, it's similar to Yu-Gi-Oh! Where the onboarding process is pretty goddamn difficult at first. However, unlike Yu-Gi-Oh!, once you're done with the onboarding process, to be honest, everything that follows is surprisingly easy. If you were going to get into a complicated card game between Yu-Gi-Oh! And Vanguard, I would actually recommend Vanguard first before you get into Yu-Gi-Oh! However, since I started with Yu-Gi-Oh!, Vanguard was surprisingly a lot easier in retrospect. So there is that. But going back to this little deck that I'm going to do to hail this new year, the entire deck is built around this. And there's only one in the deck because your ride line pretty much guarantees, specifically Kyanite Blue, she guarantees that you have this in your opener like 99.99% of the time anyway. So having only one of this is honestly very, very serviceable. You won't need any more than that. And you cannot, I repeat, you just cannot play this deck without it. And then moving on to possibly, not just possibly, it is the most expensive card in the deck, Forbidal Surrogate. This is an utterly generic Regala Speech. You can only have one of this in the deck. And the effect is you can search your deck or drop, which is the graveyard for us regular card game players, for a total of 2 grade 3 or 4 unit cards with different names, and you reveal them, and then you basically summon the grade 3s onto the field and add the grade 4 to your hand. And that is insane card advantage. It's basically a draw 2 that not only draws you 2, but it's Yu-Gi-Oh! Levels of, just play this card, you summon 2 things from the deck. if you do it that way, or if you've been placing stuff in your graveyard the entire game, which is a line that you can take with this deck in particular. You can just get it from your graveyard instead. But of course, because the card tells you to search your deck, you're going to have to shuffle even if you didn't get anything from the deck, which might actually help because this game has an entirely has a mechanic that is entirely unique to itself, which are triggers. But we'll get to that when we get to that. But yeah, this card is $70 for a goddamn reason. It is an insane consistency piece, and having only one of it in the deck definitely warrants it. Can you imagine having a playset of this thing? And a playset in this game is 4, so there is that. One thing I will say, you can do without this card. It's just that any other Regalis piece that is generic just pales in comparison to the power that Forbidal Surrogate has. The recommendation that has been put onto me is to just get a card named Caliburn, which is also a Regalis piece, and it just allows you to draw 2. And it's apparently also a perfect guard, if I remember correctly. But there's nothing quite like Forbidal Surrogate. And in fact, this entire deck, if you actually look at all of the prices on TCG Player right now, most of it, I mean, granted, most of them are in their high rarity forms, but if you just buy everything at base rarity, the only cards that are worth a price tag are Forbidal Surrogate and the card that we'll get to later, Bolt of Creation Panspermia. And this deck is basically like about $150 last time I checked, which is surprisingly cheap in the world of Vanguard. So, especially when it comes to the other staples that some of the other decks can carry. But yeah, between Forbidal Surrogate and the Regalis Calibarn, you should definitely go for the Calibarn instead, especially if you don't really need to call the units onto the field. You'd rather just draw 2 cards, you know, just to have either one of the triggers be a defensive option instead, rather than it being a trigger. Or, you know, if you don't really just need an effect quite like this. Although, granted, because this deck is built around Seraph Pure Light here, apart from the prison, having a 5th way, essentially, to search your grade 4 is definitely a bonus. And, you know, Security Upgrader does that job just as well, and it's also a common, so you can have it that way. But there's nothing quite like Forbidal Surrogate, so have one only if you can afford it. Otherwise, you can just go for the more budget option in Caliburn. Then, of course, the trigger of the deck, Star Dragon Deity of Infinitude Eldobreath, or, you know, as most people just tend to call him, just Eldobreath. Apart from being an overtrigger where it grants 100 million power to whoever is attacking at the time, which is usually your Vanguard, it has an additional effect where if you do hit it with the overtrigger, it doubles. I'm not quite sure if it also triggers on defense as well, but if it does, well, I'll know when I ask the veterans again. But the additional effect of doubling the attack and crit of all of your front row units until end of turn is insane damage. If you hit a crit first and then another crit and then you hit like the overtrigger last, the 2 crits will become a +4 and you're basically hitting for 5 damage per attacker on the front row. And that is an insane swing. And I have killed people with just showing off 1 Eldobreath. And there's a reason some people hate this deck in particular. It's simply because of Eldobreath. And oh boy, I would not leave home without it. Then moving on to the triggers, there isn't exactly much to talk about here. Treyus Green here is like 4 of in most, if not all, prison decks because she is the best heal of the bunch and probably the only one, if I remember correctly. You could use some of the more like generic heals within like Brantgit, and also, by the way, if you're building like within the nation itself, you can only use cards within that nation. You can choose to not use like Treyus Green here, but I want to keep the deck as flavorful as possible by using as many of the Aurora Battle Princesses as possible. And Treyus Green is fits the bill. And she does basically what all the other heal cards do, and she isn't so bad if you hit her like offensively as well. And you know, you're only really after her for like the defense and the offensive options. So there is that. She is replaceable definitely, but of course I love keeping the flavor in. Then moving straight on to Lurus Yellow, of course, your crit trigger. As much as possible, actually, you would want to have like 8 crit triggers in your deck as much as possible. But the 8th slot goes to Eldobreath because, good God, he is such a powerful over trigger. But similar to Treyus Green, you can have other crit triggers apart from Lurus Yellow. But of course, I am keeping the flavor in. Same with the front rows. Some builds don't even use her anymore, simply because there is a far better like front trigger in Cardinal Draco and Pyro. But we'll get to him when we get to him. You can definitely do without front rows, and you can just max out on and Pyro instead. But again, I'm keeping the flavor in. I'm keeping her in for the strictly for the flavor. Up next we have Decker Cup. Again, similar to other crit triggers, you can use others quite like just like him. Although there is a minor thing that Decker Cop can do more than any of the other crit triggers. At the end of the battle that this unit boosted, reading his effect here, you can put him into your soul, and then one of your units can get a plus 2,000 attack until end of turn. That's small, but the most important part here is Decker Cop being put into the soul. If there's one thing that this deck doesn't do too much, it's using the soul as a resource. With my specific build in particular, especially when we get to Lemonan here, I tend to use the soul quite a lot. Especially when we get to the mid to late game. And having Decker Cop here, apart from being a crit trigger or a decent blocker at that, I have had only one instance though of using him for the offensive variety. Putting him into the soul definitely helps in just padding against Lemonan's extremely expensive attack trigger here. But if she does hit, it's gonna hurt like a motherfucker. But otherwise, you're only really using him for the crit and the block value here. Then, of course, going into Pyro, most of the Brantgate decks have this guy instead for the front trigger, simply because of the effect here, where if the opponent's Vanguard is grade 3 or higher, the unit gets an additional 5,000. And having a 20k blocker is insane for this game. Max out on him, definitely, rather than splitting the difference between front rows and Pyro here. Being a 20k blocker, I mean, granted, it's not good if you hit it in the early game, but definitely mid to late game, having a 20k blocker is definitely far more useful. Up next, we have Little Royar. Yes, I will call her Little Royar, not Lifeful Royar, which I'm assuming is a translation error. And she is one of the more important grade 1s in this deck. The other one going to Blitzstaff Muna. And by the way, Blitzstaff Muna is the card that convinced me to even try Vanguard in the first place, simply because she is a horse girl. I played the Uma Musume deck way back in Shadowverse when that was the meta. Seeing Blitzstaff Muna, in her like cute little secretary, I'm assuming she's a secretary, but she could just be like a staff worker within like the offices of Brantgate. So, but I haven't dug too much deep into the lore of this game yet, but I'll get there when I get there. But going back into Little Royar, yes, I will still keep calling her Little Royar because Lifeful Royar is such an awkward name to say, but she is a consistency piece, and you're after her second effect right here, where once per turn, by Counterblast 1, you choose one of your opponent's rear guards and you press it in prison. You get the top 5 cards of your deck, and you choose one unit with grade less than or equal to your Vanguard from among them and call it to your rear guard circles. And then you shuffle the deck. Now, this is where I get into the weeds of Vanguard being deceptively complicated. You see, in Yu-Gi-Oh, I was used to A then B formulas, where A has to happen so that B can also happen. However, Vanguard treats its A then B's a little differently. If you're reading the sentence here, you would think that, if I want, granted, you need to have imprisoned a card first from your opponent's side, which is easy or hard depending on who you're fighting against, and that one's easy enough to handle. Now, when you get to the comma here, choose one of your opponent's rear guards, imprison it in your prison. Okay, simple enough. And then you look at the top 5 of his deck. Now, these 3 phrases here, all separated by commas, you would think that this is like one continuous effect. However, from what I've been told, you can actually choose to not trigger the rear guard imprisonment thing, and then just proceed to look at the top 5 cards of your deck. So this isn't an A then B. There's actually an if statement connected to this A then B statement, which is like literally computer code levels of bullshit. I can't believe you can actually do that in Vanguard. And although they did assuage my frustrations simply saying, Vanguard is similar to Magic in a way where it's a resolve as much as possible type of thing, which we will get to with another card later down the line. Little Royar is a consistency piece, and you're basically using her to cheat in one of the usually the grade 2s or the grade 3s if you're already like in the mid game onto the field. And she's also like a decent booster because she's a grade 1. And as you can see here, grade 1. So you can only play grade 1s on turn 1 if your Vanguard's a grade 1. Look, I'm not going to get too into the weeds of Vanguard because, good God, explaining what Vanguard is again, like I said somewhere in this video, the onboarding for Vanguard is just as difficult as it is for Yu-Gi-Oh! So if you know Vanguard, congratulations, you're in the right place. But if you don't know Vanguard, just listen to me gush about this archetype. Okay? Now, going back to Little Royar, as with a lot of the other non-trigger Aurora Battle Princesses, some of them have effects if a couple of cards are imprisoned in your set order, which is Galactolus. For her case, she gets an additional 5,000 attack, and then if you boost, you actually add the total of this to whoever is attacking in the front row. So this is a 13,000 power boost. And sometimes that is more than enough to get over a lot of defenses that your opponent has, or will make them commit even more cards to blocking. Little Royar, definitely a staple in, well, actually, some decks don't even have her. I just keep her in simply because, I love keeping the flavor in the decks that I build. Then moving on to another grade 1, which is Kragimus or Gurgrand. Now, again, you can literally have any other perfect guard in this slot, although the wording that they use now are Sentinels. I'm simply using this guy in particular simply because he has 7,000 attack. And a lot of the perfect guards, or again, Sentinels, have only about 5,000 attack. And this guy is the biggest of the bunch, and I just chose him because of that. Having 2,000 more power can sometimes make the difference when you're going in for the kill. Up next is a card that has absolutely nothing to do with imprisoning or whatsoever, but he is a security robot, so there is that. Oh wait, no, he does imprison stuff, but good God, this line of text is insane. So here we go. If you have a grade 3 or greater Vanguard with Seraph in its name, so you usually use this in like mid to late game, and you did not ride this turn, so about the end of the mid game, you're going to the late game and you're going to try to kill your opponent at that point, you will retire this unit. Yes, you will retire the unit, and you will perform what is called a superior ride. Which is not exactly a persona ride, but basically an activated ability of a creature. I'm not quite sure what you call creatures in this game. I'll just call it creatures. Oh right, I now remember, a unit. There we go. What you would usually do in this game is when a unit is being used for a superior ride, they would go to the soul of the Vanguard. But for this specific case, this guy is sent to the graveyard instead, which I think balances out the fact that this deck in particular doesn't exactly use the soul as a resource. So I think it's just as well that Security Upgrader doesn't go to the soul. And then you search your hand, deck, or drop for a grade 4 unit with Seraphine Same, which is usually just the one that we will get to when we get to. And then you ride it. And then if you search, shuffle your deck. And then the second sentence, if you rode the card, which what you would usually do when you do get to that point, you choose a card from your opponent's graveyard and then you imprison it. And then you reduce the original cost of the Seraph that you rode that turn by removing the Counterblast 1. And more often than not, you will actually not have a Counterblast card that has Seraph in its name, simply because you don't have any in this deck. Unless, of course, you hit one off of your damage triggers and you only have 3 copies of this, basically what I would call the captain of the deck. Well, if all 3 are like there, well, you're shit out of luck, unfortunately. Although granted, Seraph Snow is also like decent as a finisher, but good God, it doesn't hit as hard as Seraph Pure Light. But going back to Security Upgrader, definitely you're using him mostly to remove that pesky Counterblast 1, and it's an insane consistency piece on top of the Forbidal Surrogate. Then moving on to Blitzstaff Muna, she's really only here for her second effect, where once per turn, Whenever any player's unit is placed on a rearguard circle from your order zone during any player's main phase, you will Soul Blast one and then you draw a card. I have had a game where I had three like Blitzstaff Muna in my rearguard circle, and I drew three cards by Soul Blasting three times. Well, Soul Blast one three times. I got an insane amount of defense for my opponent's offense, and I survived, and then I killed him on the crackback. She does have an additional effect where if you have three or more cards in your order zone, which usually in this case would be your prison, she cannot be chosen by card effects, so giving her hexproof for us Magic players, and she also gets a power boost. I don't know why, and this is just my gripe with the website in general, I don't know why Makarite is the only one who has an HD image of her card, like on the website. Like, why? Why, Bushiroad? Why? But she's only a PR, unfortunately, and you can only really get her from participating in tournaments, so good luck trying to grind for her. Especially like this SP form that you see in front of you. And it's far rarer to get this SP form, and just stick to her normal form. In fact, I'm going to just ask you guys to just stick to the base forms of this deck, just to keep it like within a reasonable budget. But of course, this is digital, and I have a chance to bling out my stuff. I mean, I'm gonna bling it out just so that it looks good. But what Makarite does, if she is placed on the rearguard circle from hand, so if you summon her from hand, you Soul Blast one, and then your opponent imprisons the top card of your deck, of their deck rather, face up. And then if there are two or more cards imprisoned in prison, she gets a significant attack boost. She attacks for 15, which is really decent, especially in the mid game. And she is the only card so far in this deck that touches a zone that I'm not quite sure how many other decks can touch, which is the top of the deck. A lot of the other cards in this deck tend to just either attack the hand or the graveyard. She's the only one who attacks the top of the deck, and there's a reason why there's like 4 of her here. And she's the only other card in this deck that uses the soul as a resource. Definitely a 4 of, for me at least. Some builds don't even have her. I don't know why, but I can definitely understand, because you don't exactly have too much of a soul to work with in this specific deck, but I can definitely see the use cases for her, at least in my specific build. You're free to cut her, especially for better Brandgate cards, especially, as we're going to get to the next card, just apparently will be a better version of this guy coming out somewhere down the pipeline, and it's apparently really soon. So we're going to get to him now. That's a good enough transition to Bullet of Creation, Panspermia. This is a $20 card whose only purpose is to basically give you a +1, and that is bullshit, because this guy's only purpose is the first line of text here. When this card is put to the guard zone from hand or discarded from the hand while riding from the right deck, you will Counter Blast 1 or Energy Blast 3, and then you draw a card. Now, more often than not, you will be using the Energy Blast mechanic here, which is a system that they introduced fairly recently, I believe. I believe it was around, if not last year, 2 years ago, where they introduced the energy mechanic, which is similar to Digimon's memory system. And but unlike Digimon's memory system, you gradually gain energy, and it's like in batches of 3. This deck also doesn't use the energy mechanic like too much. The only 2 cards that use it are Panspermia here and Corner Citrus, which we'll get to in a bit. But going back to Panspermia, I mean, he's only really here for a +1, and there's a reason why there's only 2 copies of him. And I would cut him, and have the 2 copies of Little Royar and Muna back into the deck. But in all of the games that I've played with Panspermia, he is definitely as good as people say he is. I would replace him like ASAP once. There's apparently another, and people call this a cycler. There will be a better card for my deck in particular that will be coming out in the future, simply because I'm only really using him for the absolute floor of him, giving me a +1. My deck doesn't exactly Persona ride a lot, which makes this second effect here absolutely useless for this deck in particular. Similar to the other cards in this deck, you are more than free to cut this guy, simply because I do not like the fact that he is ruining the flavor of this deck, and hell, similar even to Enpyro, because good god, I want to keep this deck as flavorful as possible. Just have all of basically the force here as much as possible. but I can definitely see the power behind this card in particular, and having only two of already feels good. You don't want too much of this effect anyway, because you don't exactly ride from your hand rather often, especially with this deck in particular. Moving right along, we get to Corner Citrus, and this is one of the linchpins of this deck, and I will tell you why. So her first effect first, when she is placed on a rearguard circle, you imprison a card from their graveyard, and then if you imprison the card, you will energy blast 3, and then you draw a card. So she is a not exactly a +1. You just card neutral because you use her, and then you imprison a card from your opponent's side, and then you draw a card. So it's sort of card neutral. But what she is in the deck for, and there's a reason why most builds of Prison these days have her at 4, is her second effect, where when you're grade 3 or greater Vanguard with Seraph in its name, so it's usually Seraph Snore or Seraph Pure Light even, you attack with Corner Citrus first, and then you attack with the Seraphs next, because she will then check if you have 3 or more cards in your prison, she gets +10, and then if there are 5 or more cards, you can counterblast 1, and then she stands again so that she can attack again. And if you have Seraph Pure Light active by that point, and she's giving like a massive boost of attack to all of your units, she can swing in for like tons and tons of damage, all by herself. And there's a reason why most builds have her these days. And hell, I've even seen a crazy ass build that doesn't even have grade 3s. It all stops at 2. I don't know why. And I don't even know how you're going to be able to summon Seraph Pure Light without your grade 3s, but some people are just insane like that. And but yeah, Corner Citrus is definitely a powerful unit. And do not cut her. Like, absolutely do not cut her from the deck. She is definitely worth the 4 slots. Up next, we have Execute Lebanon. Definitely the most sus card in the deck. And this is the card that basically broke the camel's back. Her art is what convinced me to even play Vanguard, because she is definitely at the Ara Onesan of the squad here. It definitely shows in her effect as well, although the cost to activate her effect is extremely expensive in Counter Blast 1 and Soul Blast 3. Again, this deck doesn't exactly use its soul as a resource too much, but if you do have the soul and the Counter Blast to pay for her on attack trigger, by the way, you will imprison 3 of your opponent's rear guards. Usually by that point, you would have already imprisoned everything else with your other effects anyway, so you're only really using this to trigger the second effect. She checks if there are 3 cards that are imprisoned in your prison, and then until the end of that battle, she gets +10,000, and then if 5 or more imprisoned, she gets crit +1. So she hits for 2 damage. Just by herself, she is 23,000 baseline if you meet her requirements, and then she hits for 2 damage, which is insane for a grade 3. But granted, she's only a 1-of because paying the cost to gain that boost is absurdly expensive. But again, she's hot. She's staying in the deck. Let's move on. Up next, we have Taser Lage, which is the biggest tech card in this deck. I have seen other builds that don't have her at all. Most other builds, in fact, going back to Makarite here, the reason why they don't have Makarite instead is they have a card named Derry, which is also an Aurora Battle Princess, and she's basically a perfect guard, but only for grade 2s. And it's basically a hedge against the more aggressive decks in this format right now, at least from what I've been told. I basically have no idea what the meta is like. I just, play in the tournaments. Yes, I am already playing in the tournaments, and I do surprisingly decent at them. I usually end up on the top half of the bottom half of however many participants are there. I don't break into like the top half, which is insane for somebody who literally just started playing this game. So there is that. But Taser Lage is a card, and of course, Short-Hair Tomboy, that's already like a pass in my book, so she's going into the deck. She is here as a way to basically punish your opponent from getting their stuff out of prison. Although, granted, her effect triggers only once per turn, and she will immediately check if something got out of prison in the first place. And this is especially devastating if your opponent uses a counterblast to get 2 stuff out, and then you basically will have a choice. What you would usually rest is the unit that is far more dangerous to either boost or attack. Of course, that is dependent on the matchup, but having her only as a 1-of feels like appropriate. More so than Lemonan here. I mean, granted, if you could, you can run two of Taser Lage instead of having her split a slot with Lemonan here. But again, they're both hot. They're gonna stay in the deck. Let's move on to the next one, which is definitely the most important grade 3 in this deck, which is unfortunately named Penetrate Aquas. I can only imagine what this girl does in her free time, but we're not going to dive too deep into that. What she does, on play, she imprisons a card from the graveyard, and then if she is in the rear guard, or hell, even in the guard zone for that matter, if two or more cards are imprisoned in the prison, she gets either 5,000 attack, sure, if she's in the rear guard circle, or plus 10,000 defense if she is in your hand and you want to block with her. And then for the battle, this unit attacked, well, so basically if you're using her for offense, your opponent would need to block her with 2 cards in hand, and that is insane tempo from a grade 3. There's a reason most builds have her like a full 4 of, or hell, even a 3 of, but never below that. She is an insane tempo swing, and you can set her up alongside any of your other like grade 3s, or hell, even like corner citrus here. You can definitely close up the game like fairly quickly at that point. You must never ever leave home without Penetrate Aquas here. And finally, to round out the main deck, we have the boss monster, the captain of this deck, Aurora Fierce Princess, Seraph Pure Light. I'm pretty sure this is just the upgraded version of Seraph Snow, because she is sporting like nearly the same hair, nearly the same facial features, but I'll just have to read up on the lore about that. So, when she is put in the Vanguard zone, you will Counterblast 1 and Soul Blast 1, a card with Seraph in its card name. But how can you do that if you don't have a Seraph in your Counterblast zone? Simple. That is what the security upgrader is for. You're going to remove that pesky Counterblast cost, and you will just Soul Blast 1 with Seraph in its name. By that point, you would usually have a Seraph Snow like in your Vanguard zone anyway, so that's a very easy requirement to pay for playing this extremely powerful card. And then, if she is put in the Vanguard circle, your opponent will imprison 2 cards each from the hand, rear guard, and soul. And that can be extremely devastating for some decks. I have faced off against other decks where the moment I say that I will imprison something from their soul, I can see their spirit like be deflated right in front of my eyes. If I play my cards right, especially around the point where I summon Seraph Pure Light, I would usually win the game at that point. And doubly so if I hit like Eldo Breath among my drive checks. And it doesn't even stop there, because during your turn, all of your front row units gets plus 5,000 attack for every 2 of your opponent's cards imprisoned in your prison. If you have 10 or more, all of your front row units get plus 1 crit. So there is no other finisher in this deck quite like Seraph Pure Light. All of your imprisoning leads up to this, and if you're facing off against an opponent that loves to swarm their board with a lot of rear guards and loves filling up the graveyard, you're going to have plenty enough targets to basically fulfill Seraph Pure Light's absolutely game-ending bullshittery, and you can never leave home with like any less than 2 of this card. But I prefer to run it at 3, and it feels right to run it at 3. Simply because you don't exactly want this in your opening hand, although some people argue against it because she is the win con, and the hand is one of the safest places to be in Vanguard, simply because not a lot of decks really mess with your hand, unless of course I am missing some things. Then again, I am missing most things because I literally just started playing this game. But that is it for the main deck. And before we go to the main deck, by the way, if you do have like 10 or more cards in your prison, the attack boost is 25,000. Wait, not even 25. I think it's around 30,000. And not a lot of decks can block against that. Your opponent would have to use like perfect guards at that point. And let's just move on to the ride deck. So to start things off here in the ride deck, we're going to go over the 5th card in the ride deck, which is the Energy Generator. Simply because of the energy mechanic being a part of this game now, this is an absolute necessity in this deck. You cannot participate in bigger tournaments if you do not have this, people have called it a crest. If you don't have this crest in your deck, you simply cannot play in bigger tournaments. In local level events, yes, you can get away with it, simply because not everybody will really want to carry too much cardboard with them, unless of course you want to buy and sell stuff. But you cannot play in bigger tournaments without this crest in your 50. Then moving on to the actual ride line, which is a mechanic that they introduced, I believe, shortly after G Stride, like, came and went. Although the mechanic like is somewhat similar with G striding, from what I've been told. But we're going to start with our grade 0, and this is usually your like the one that you start off with, which is Ruby Red. And she doesn't exactly stay on the field for long, because immediately when you start your turn, you will go right into Kyanite Blue. And I feel so sad that Ruby Red doesn't exactly get as much pot as he does, because look at that face. That's a face only a mother could love, and I am all for it. But we're going to get into our flat-chested, short-haired girl here. So if you put her in the Vanguard zone, you search Galactolus. And this is the reason why it's only a one-off in the deck, because you are more often than not guaranteed to get into it. Unless, of course, Vanguard introduces like a mechanic where it stops you from doing that, like right on turn 0, which is insane, by the way. But if you do indeed have it in your mind to put copies of her in the main deck, she does something. But more often than not, she is just in the Vanguard circle, just doing her thing and searching you the Galactolus. Then moving right along to Razat Pink. This is your grade 2, and she's basically the one that starts your entire imprisoning thing. If she's put in the Vanguard circle, you imprison a card from hand, and sometimes some people find that absolutely devastating, because it takes out a key piece from their hand, and they don't want to have guard with like two with their like more important units, especially the ones that have only like 5k defense here, as you can see. But without Razat Pink, your imprisoning like stuff will basically not get their foot off the ground. So yeah, more than any of the other grade 2s, Razat Pink definitely fills the bill more than any of the others. And finally, the grade 3 of this deck, Aurora Baton Princess Seraph Snow, the ace monster of Tomori Seto here. I'm probably already butchering the name already, because it might be Tomari Seto or Tomori Seto. It's one of the two. But here we are with her, like, I'm just realizing this was designed by Clamp Studios. Like, that explains why her legs look the way they are, because that's like a Clamp Studio signature right there. Good God, no wonder. The artist is Clamp Studios. Okay, now, that explains why the art like looks the way it does. But it's a beautiful piece, by the way. Like, this card, if you have it, you have a $200 piece of cardboard like in your fucking collection. Like, Jesus Christ. But Seraph Snow is the last card in your ride deck, and if she's in your Vanguard circle, she first checks if you have one or more cards in your prison, and she just gets a plus 10,000, like just like that. So she attacks for 10k with barely an effort. However, if you have 3 or more cards in your prison, she gets drive plus 1. So it's basically triple drive without triple drive. What you would usually say, in order to prevent any like judge calls and whatnot, what you would say is twin drive plus 1, simply because that is literally what is written on Seraph Snow. And then she also has an activated ability where once per turn you counter blast 1, you will imprison 2 of your opponent's rear guards. And once you do that, in conjunction with the, you probably already imprison at least 1 card from your opponent's side, and then Seraph Snow herself imprisons 2, then that gets you your drive plus 1, and you do 3 checks, and sometimes you hit Elder Breath off of it, and you somewhat kill your opponent right then and there. And that did indeed happen. The one time it did happen, my opponent got so salty that they dropped from the tournament. Good God, man. The memories that this card game gives is just something else entirely. And I can understand now from the stories that I hear from players who visit the shop and play Vanguard. I can definitely understand their sentiments now. Basically, the nature of the game is just boils down to luck. And this is probably why I like playing Hearthstone so much, and why I eventually like the system that Vanguard gives me here, because it's partially luck based, and the swings, granted, the swings that this game has is far more in your favor rather than in your opponent's, because unlike in Hearthstone, if the momentum swings in your opponent's favor, there is honestly very little chance that you will bounce back from that. But here in Vanguard, there is always a chance that you will bounce back, and it's usually a 50-50. which is far less atrocious than it is in Hearthstone. But that concludes for my extremely scuffed deck tech of my specific build for Prison here. Definitely keep rocking this deck moving forward. And again, granted, I don't have the exact copies that you see here on screen, but again, this is digital. I would want them to look as good as possible for the camera, of course. And again, Bushy Road, please just give us HD images so that I'm pretty sure like everyone had to squint and reading the effect. Although granted, I am narrating everything anyway. But Macarite, if my viewers wanted to just read it, they can very, very easily read it from here. And but yeah, that's my only other gripe. And if you guys like what you saw, hit like, comment, subscribe, and share this among your friends. And until next time, toodles.